But my biggest issue with the Pistons over the past couple of years is they draft role players and then ask the role players to
1000%.
like
It's a great point.
Sadiq Bey is a perfect example, right? Sadiq
Yep.
Bey coming out of college was just a catch and shoot 3-point specialist, like one of the best out of his draft class. The Pistons said, "Hey, how about you become a 3-level scorer?" Which was not part of his game when he was playing out of position.
Be Chris Middleton. Like that was a 5% chance outcome probably.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's been their biggest issue, probably my entire Pistons fandom. I mean, I've been watching the Pistons since like the Grant Hill era. Like they just try to draft these role players and like try to say, "Oh, you're gonna be like the star player." It's just like, no, like play to where their strengths are at, and they just haven't done that yet.
Asar Thompson should be the 5th option offensively right now in his career. And then then it'd be like, hey, look what he does defensively, rebounding, and then he just play finishes. I say this about Isaiah Stewart. I think Isaiah Stewart is a good NBA basketball player. He's not a starter. I don't think Isaiah Stewart is a starter in the NBA. I think fans would like Isaiah Stewart if he was the first big coming off the bench that played 75% of his minutes at the 5, 25% of his minutes at the 4 against certain matchups. Hey, you know what? Isaiah Stewart shoots 36% from 3 off the bench for the Pistons. I think people would think that's a pretty good player, but trying to start him at the 4 with a non-space lineup to begin with, and now everybody hates him because he's in a role that he's not ready for and not equipped for, not talented enough for. So that's why I think talent acquisition is so important. Let's put these guys in roles that they can actually be successful in.
100%. I mean, Isaiah Stewart to me is just a standstill 3-point shooter.
100%. Yeah.
And then they try to ask him to be this movement shooter and make decisions that he's just not comfortable with yet in his development. I mean, he's an underrated passer, but I don't think he's ready to put the ball on the floor and go to the cup. I just don't.
And not whenever you have the other guys around him on the roster. Like you play him with Jalen Duren, who's a non-floor space. Like it just – and this is no knock on these guys individually. And of course they're young. I can hear people screaming, Duren's only 20, Asar's only I get it. I'm just saying, I just don't know that that's what's best for their progression when we're asking them to do so much so early. And I think a big fault of that, sure, you want to blame the coaching staff. I get it. I understand it. Let's put it a little bit on the players. They have to develop as well. Like they have to put in the work. That's part of them. But I think it's also just sheer roster construction, not having floor spacers, not having a guy that can go get buckets and those type of things where now all of a sudden you need Sadiq Bey to be a 25-point a game night a couple years into his career. And what's your thoughts on this? Listen, the Bruce Brown trade was awful, right? We can all agree. Awful, awful, awful process. Brutal process. But every time I think of Bruce Brown in Detroit, I envision him being asked to be like a star, number 1, number 2, number 3 option, and Pistons fans being upset with him because he's not good enough to be in that role. Like Bruce Brown was awesome in Denver because he was the 4th or 5th option on that team and just got to do the things he was great at. So again, awful trade. I'm not condoning the trade. I'm just saying I wonder what it would have looked like in Detroit when he was asked to be in a role that wasn't just this connective tissue type of player.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Bruce Brown because I was calling them the Detroit Nuggets.
Yeah,
because they had all of our role players. They had Ish Smith. They had Reggie Jackson. Like Detroit for
KCP.
KCP. Detroit for all the crap they get for draft misses. They know how to draft good role players.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
No, I'm good. You can go ahead.
I was on the Athletic NBA show. It just dropped today. If you guys want to go listen, we talked a lot of Pistons NBA draft, and we did some Pistons draft trivia, draft/Pistons. Don't hate on me too much for not knowing all the answers. But one of the questions was Pistons players that have been drafted since 2004 that have won championships on other teams. And the answers were Middleton, Bruce Brown, and KCP. Well, 2 of those guys were drafted in the 2nd round. The Pistons drafted 2 dudes in the 2nd round that have gone on to be major players and starters at the very least on NBA championship teams. And so it is funny that they've drafted some good players, role players to an extent, but good players. The Pistons haven't been able to reap the benefits of those draft picks because they haven't been able to get the stars to put them in the necessary roles.
Yeah, it's literally like the $1 million question. Like, why are the Pistons in the situation that they're in? And you give, fans the answer and they don't like the answer. I don't know if it's they don't like the reality of the answer, or they're just upset when they go back and have revisionist history and look at the draft boards. And like, I'll use Tyrese Halliburton for example. Like, they look at Tyrese Halliburton versus Killian Hayes or Desmond Bain and a Tyrese Maxey and they get upset.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what it's so you can get down a quick rabbit hole when you start looking at some of those
Oh
things
yeah.
of the guys that could be on this roster. And it is frustrating. I understand the frustration, and that's why I think it's a big summer. There's $60 million in cap space. There's young talent, even including the number 5 pick. I know it's a quote unquote bad draft, but there are young assets on the roster. I think the more and more we talk about it, the more and more I look at it, the more I think it is time they need to go get, if they don't think it's Jaden Ivey. And in my opinion, I don't think the organization thinks it's Jaden Ivey.
Mm.
And so you got to find a guy that can get buckets on this team off of Cade Cunningham, and then other dudes slot into necessary roles. You don't have to build a championship roster, right? You don't have to even build a playoff roster. Give me a competent roster that makes sense.